everyone. Welcome to our webinar today, Creating Clear Sightlines to Employment, presented by our very own John McLaughlin from Essential Skills Ontario. My name is Allison Mullen, and I'm the Manager of Communications and Marketing here at Essential Skills Ontario. So just before we get started and I do my little intro for John, I just want to give you a few instructions. At the right-hand side of your screen is your dashboard. There you can chat with each other in the chat pane and ask questions in the questions pane. If it's a technical question, I will try to get back to you and assist you throughout the webinar. If you have any questions about the content, feel free to ask. We will be doing a Q&A with John towards the end of the webinar. And if you'd like to participate and keep the conversation going on Twitter, just use the hashtag ESOWeb. So now to introduce our presenter. John is the Manager of Research and Business Development at Essential Skills Ontario. He has a long and distinguished career in the literacy field, both in Canada and internationally. He was the founding Executive Director of the Preparatory Training Program, PTP, one of the largest community-based literacy programs in Ontario. At Essential Skills Ontario, John is leading a number of initiatives and applied research related to labor market development, effective program design, performance improvement, and accountability. So I'm going to leave it at that and pass it over to John.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. I hope you have your coffee and your tea, and let's go on a bit of a journey together. Of course, and one of the things I have to learn how to do is actually hit a screen to move it. So on the far left, as many of you will know, or I hope many of you have had the opportunity to read Menial No More, which was published at about this time last year. And Menial No More was something that basically came off the side of my desk, something that I had seen while we were working on a workplace literacy and essential skills program with 16 different employers. The paper in of itself talked about a whole group of issues, one of which, though, primarily was the changing nature of entry-level jobs across, well, Ontario for the most part, but from the response that we got to the paper, and I got responses from many different provinces, from different countries. We were engaged in a whole variety of dialogues about what actually did it mean. We, in many ways, tried to highlight some of the challenges and also indicate that literacy and essential skills had a role to play. You know, it touched a chord. We also know that whether it's the Canadian Chamber of Commerce, the Ontario Chamber of Commerce, and a variety of other organizations keep talking about the skills disconnect in the country. And what we try and do is examine, well, what does that actually mean? And so 2 papers have already come out. What we've started to examine is, how do we solve the problems that we saw in Menial No More and that others seem to be seeing as well, right? And so we realized that if we put together a 250-page treatise, that probably not too many people would read it. So we tried to think about, what would it actually mean? What are some of the preconditions for this particular sector in terms of trying to address the challenges? Where are the possibilities? Where are the opportunities? And so several months ago, Industry Shared Approaches came out, our first paper, which talked about how literacy and essential skills providers, community groups, literacy networks, all can start to examine how they can work with the employment community. Right? The second paper that we're going to talk a little bit, well, actually a lot of bit about today, is Clear Sightlines to Employment. In the next 3 weeks or so, our next paper, which is Creating Career Ladders, The Time to Step Up, will be coming out. And then the third piece, which is called Beyond Aisles, the fancy name of complex communication and problem solving, will come out as well. And what the 4 papers together is to tell a story, right? And I'm hoping that those will come clear. and we'll be talking a little bit about that story today. But the papers in of themselves don't just talk about individual issues. So all of the papers, we're talking about the changing nature of jobs. And in Menial No More, we talked about complex problem solving in communication and technology-rich environments. Someone said to me, John, you can't use that term. And I admit, it's a little bit unwieldy, perhaps a little bit unfashionable, but it describes the exact challenge. And increasingly, since we mentioned that phrase over a year ago, and we didn't invent it, you've started to see it in more and more documents. This is the skill that was described by Frank Levy at MIT in Boston 10 years ago. And it's the ability to not only transmit or elicit information electronically or digitally, but to convey an interpretation or problem solve around that information. It is the single largest determinant of income, success in employment, and engagement in community, and that's documented by the OECD. It may be the single most important skill that an individual can have in the changing world. Right? And a little example, which I'll be talking about in the upcoming paper, is think about Amazon. Right? Amazon has gone from a fairly niche online retailer to now being one of the largest retailing organizations in the world. Right? It's as big as many of the large department stores that we have, but it's all done online. And furthermore, what's really interesting is early this year, Amazon bought Kivo. And Kivo is the world's largest robotics company. So the next time you order a book from Amazon, you realize you're ordering online and that the book is actually being shipped to you by robots. Now, one would say, well, that would mean that Amazon almost has no employees. No, that would be incorrect. In fact, Amazon has as many employees as another retailer of about the similar size. The jobs are just different. So what else are we talking about? We're talking about social innovation that leads to purposeful program design and the role of employers, community, and the literacy and essential skills provision, right? And social innovation is a way of marrying different ideas and changing. What it says is that the world has changed so much in the last 20 years that we may have to rethink the way in which we do service delivery, the way in which we deliver programs, and that we're going to need to bring in a whole new range of partners if we're to solve intractable social problems, of which literacy and basic skills is one. Right? And we're also talking about, most importantly, about poverty. Right? And we'll be talking a little bit more about this today. But as we look at a variety of interventions, as an awful lot, I'm sure out there, many of the clients that we deal with on a day-to-day basis, it's about poverty and trying to find ways in which we can help individuals and families escape the cycle of poverty. Obviously, the work that we're doing today will not solve it alone. But as we look to the United States, the UK, Australia, and New Zealand, we can see actually how literacy, essential skills, and basic skills can act as a substantial lever to help individuals and families move out of that particular cycle. But it means that we may have to change things up a little bit. Right? The common features of poverty, obviously single parents, offenders, people with tenuous employment history, household income below the low income measure for mental and physical health conditions, low levels of confidence and self-esteem, obviously Aboriginals. And one of the common denominators that goes through group after group after group is the lack of a high school diploma. And sometimes people ask me, John, why aren't you using IELTS, right? And there's a recent study that came out that talks about IELTS income levels, right? As we delve into economic development and in regions and stats, while IELTS and probably the upcoming PIAC data is fairly specific, when we actually look at communities, we see that a high school diploma, right, is where we're actually able to data mine and find really useful information. And so for the purposes of this and purposes of many of our papers, we recognize that a high school diploma has currency or a certificate has currency with employers, and we need to understand that. Employers simply don't understand IELTS levels. Right? And the relationship to income support is exceptionally compelling. Right? Of the 170,000 or so individuals collecting Ontario Works, as we look as a percentage, that OW recipients are almost at 50% of those who are collecting do not have a high school diploma. And when we get to ODSP, we see that it's even more relevant. And we might say to ourselves, well, you're starting to see that the economy is starting to grow. We've seen employment levels start to drop, that increasingly those without a high school diploma will, probably join us in this economic recovery. Well, in fact, though, if we look at the data, the recession has not ended for individuals without a high school diploma. Right? The employment rate is at only 35.7%, which, as StatsCan noted, has shown, unlike those with a post-secondary degree, a certificate diploma, or a university degree, it has not gone back to its traditional level. And in fact, almost all of Ontario's lag in terms of job creation and employment resides with those who did not get a high school diploma. If you've got a university degree, if you've even got a high school diploma or a college diploma, you're about where you were in 2007 before the recession began. If you don't have a high school diploma, it's worse, and it's not likely to get better. We can actually see something that's called a constant or a secular trend. And what that tells us is that this is not just a causation of the recession or the economic challenges that the province and the rest of Canada are in. That it's a long-term decline. And this probably isn't news to many of you, but it is quite prevalent. It's dropping at about the rate of 1.7% per year in terms of employment attachment. Right? And as I said, if my feeling would be if that we extended this to 2015, 2016, all the way to 2021, this secular trend would continue. So the skills we need to participate and work and in society are changing. The nature of jobs are changing. And we can distinctly see that people are being left behind. So how can we adapt? Well, one of the things that we like to do, in particular here at Essential Skills Ontario, is play a bit of a role of the interlocutor or as a research organization, try and figure out, well, who is specifically dealing with the issue of training for individuals without a high school diploma and who are on some form of income support. And partly because the United States and the United Kingdom have been using data for a longer period of time, that they've been able to see, whether it's through demonstration projects, initiatives, a variety of other activities, what is working and what's not working. So we can't be guaranteed that a lot of the things that are working elsewhere will work in Ontario, but we can draw some conclusions about what might work and what might we experiment with. So first off, when you look at what occurred elsewhere, we have to look at what other challenges other jurisdictions faced as they started to sort through copious amounts of data. So what were they seeing? Well, they saw low rates of client enrollment in adult basic education, right? That once they instituted a more rigorous data, they actually didn't see as many clients as they thought they were going to see or that were previously reported. They saw low rates of client persistence in adult basic education, right? That many clients came and a lot left. They saw, surprisingly, the lack of non-high school graduates in ABE-funded programs, right? In one state, over 70% of those who were in ABE already had a high school diploma, yet the state had 80,000 individuals collecting social assistance, their form of social assistance, who weren't in ABE. Right? It's a smaller state, so it was a bit of a challenge. They were wondering, how were they not able to get these people into those programs? And why were ABE programs primarily made up of high school graduates? And I think it was even 15% already at a degree of some sort. Those who stayed in the programs stayed for an awful long time, right? And ultimately, the costs became unrealistic. There was a lack of congruity with employment and employer needs, a bit of a disconnect. There was unrealistic gaps between classroom learning and on-the-job skill needs. Very important one. There was a limited range of necessary client support, so we're going to return to this in a little bit. There was a lack of clarity regarding career opportunities. So the granddaddy, or grandparent, I guess, is that the correct term? As I looked at Allison, who's sitting beside me, and she scowled. The grandparent program is iBest. And it was started about 12 years ago in its formation stage. Right? And iBest was an experiment that was conducted in Washington. And it was designed specifically to test the traditional notion that students must first complete all levels of adult basic education before they entered skills training or went on to a college degree program or went straight to employment. And it purposefully integrated hands-on job skills with basic skills. And iBest has run about 70 different individual programs through colleges, primarily, and some community groups, in a whole range of jobs. Most of them started off at entry-level training and then provided options for either going on to college or moving straight into employment. It went from manufacturing, well, still does, offers programs in healthcare, manufacturing, emergency services, forestry, and on and on and on. And through their first cohorts, they collected a tremendous amount of data, and that data was maintained by the Community College Research Association. Also, and really actually quite important, was that iBest was clear about who the program was designed for. iBest did not take individuals who already had a high school diploma. They did not, by and large, take second language learners. They wanted people functioning below a grade 9 level. Right? You actually had to fail a test to get into the program. Because what they were seeing was that they wanted to design a program specifically for individuals who didn't have a certificate, didn't have a diploma, and didn't have very much job opportunity. $50,000 students later, and using control groups, results show that iBest students, compared to students who were in previously designed programs, progressed further, faster, and better. And now across the United States, in the UK, New Zealand, and to a lesser extent, Australia, people have been taking the lessons of iBest, and they've been trying to think about how would we implement this program here, because they can see, policymakers saw a large number of non-high school graduates on their social assistance roles. They saw that traditional interventions did not seem to be working for those folks. And just to echo some of those themes here, being part of another initiative around Ontario Works in the Greater Toronto Area, when they look at social assistance with the recipients without a high school diploma, and they have a fair amount of data on this, they get employed very sporadically, drop on and off of social assistance. They seem to not move very far. And one of the things that they've been able to track in the States is trying to figure out how can we actually move these folks off of welfare or social assistance in a meaningful way, give them real skills. And this has been an ongoing challenge. Dean Hurd has written about this extensively, that we have to find something that works, not just for the individuals, but for their families as well. And we know through studies in Australia and the United States that if a parent isn't working, it's very unlikely that well, not very unlikely, but the odds of their children not working and ending up in social assistance is very high. That the largest predictor of whether a young adult will end up on social assistance was whether or not they saw their parents were employed. It wasn't just the amount that a parent earned, but it was if they were employed. So what are we seeing from all the replications of iBest? And there's many now. There's literally thousands in the States, many in the UK, and Australia and New Zealand. They blend work-specific technology skills with basic skills. They focus on local occupations and industries that are projected to be in high demand. Right? And of course, we all know that that's easier said than done. Right? That labor market information is a real challenge. It is a bit of a federal, provincial, municipal problem. It's something that we need to get right. We need to do purposeful design of programs. Right? It's really hard running a program. I know, I've run many. And we're always faced with the challenge. Who do we let in our door? Who do we not let in our door? And how do we find out what works for whom? And it's a really important issue because the challenges between some folks with different characteristics are different than others. And the results will be different. Something that we're going to talk more about in the coming months is career ladders, right? And in the recent changes to the Workforce Investment Act in the States, just about everything that is funded under the Department of Labor has to link into a career ladder. Basically what it means is after you're finished teaching someone or your program has worked with them and they move into employment, that you continue to support them in their learning. That certificates, diplomas are all matched to industries. And a good example of that is the range of manufacturing certificates in the United States, which has been identified as helping in some states to resurrect the manufacturing sector. You start off with an entry-level certificate, and you can move the entire way up to some sort of university diploma. But it's all wrapped around that industry, and you can learn and earn at the same time. What it does is it addresses the issue of a dead-end job, right? A dead-end job can occur in many ways, so instead it's turning a dead-end job into an entry-level job and into a career path. Right? And we have this now, I think, under Employment Ontario Information System, as everyone's grumbling and entering in the data in CAMS, is data to measure and track participant labor market success to help strengthen program design. And not only did iBest, RISE, and the really good one is SkillWorks, because they examine these issues every year, they actually haven't remained static. The programs have changed, units have changed, components and modules have changed, all based on how successful different cohorts of students were. One of the more developed ones that talks about career ladders and talks about integrated training is the Minnesota example, which is called Fast Track, which has many different kinds of integrated training programs where they integrate basic skills, literacy skills, with hands-on jobs training that is then mapped out along a career pathway. In this example, it's primarily about manufacturing, but they have similar charts and very complex charts for healthcare, transportation and logistics, food processing, and on and on and on, right? So that the system just doesn't drop someone off in the front door, but it supports them as they learn and earn, as gather certificates, move up on the employment ladder, either with their employer or with another employer in that particular industry. It creates wage progression. One of the things that we don't talk very much about in the paper, which was, I think, as I once again glance at Amber, is about the 4 pages that I removed, was about wraparound support. So one of the things that we see when we look at integrated training is not only the literacy and basic skills, the industry and occupational specific skills, but also the wraparound support. It means pre- and post-program career counseling and mentoring. Once again, you just don't talk about a career, and when the person goes to a job, it's over. What they do is they specifically stay in touch with the participant and mentor them through the process. So yeah, we got you into the front desk at a department store. How do we move you off the front desk upstairs or into a customer service position? All of these things become the responsibility of a program. Financial supports. Right? So basically, one of the things that they learned is that you have to get transportation, housing, food, all the supports many of us are familiar with, sorted out, and sorted out early and right away so that it doesn't impede the clear sight line to employment. They need health support, right? Medicine, psychological, addiction counseling, etc. Personal and family counseling. Right? So many of these programs don't do it themselves, but they specifically link into the community services that they have. Intensive case management. And in many of the evaluations of IBEST and elsewhere, this is often identified as the most important ingredient in the IBEST, oh God, I want to say IBEST cake, but it's often identified as the most important thing, as it is for skills work. So as I mentioned, there's thousands of integrated ABE programs that are purposefully designed around non-high school graduates. And I should always add in, for many of them, it means that they're on social assistance, welfare, or some other form of support. This is when the fabulous graphics come into play. Right? And you see there's many different kinds of programs. And in Australia, the BET system is working to do the same thing. In the UK, through the Employer Ownership of Skills programs, what they're really trying to do is bring employers and programs together. One of the most common elements in all of these programs is team teaching. So when you take a look at some of the programs, what you'll see is that an employer is often involved as part of the instruction in terms of the skills training, so that you may have literacy and basic skills instructors working in the morning with the students, and an employer or skills training institution working in the afternoon with hands-on skills. Or the employer will lend technology, and one of the best examples is John Deere in the States, or a Microsoft program that is working with veterans, right, where they're providing ABE, but also the most modern and effective technology that they're going to encounter in the workplace. So one of the things is I'm often asked, and I think which I've actually got an awful lot of emails or from people after Clear Sightlines came out, well, how do we get there in Ontario? Well, first off, while we can't be sure that other integrated programs will work in Ontario, we can think, but we also need to start to seriously think about what works for whom. Right? What may work for an advanced ESL, second language learner, may not be what works out for a native-born individual on social assistance who dropped out of high school. Right? The challenges that an individual encountered in terms of dropping out of school may not have been answered in the intervening years. I keep mentioning blend literacy and essential skills provision with job training to get the best out of each. Involve employers in training. Develop career ladders so an entry-level job is just the first step in a career. Build on promising initiatives. And one of the things is we do have some promising initiatives in Ontario. There's a hotel worker training program downtown offered by, in downtown Toronto, offered by the union in conjunction with the downtown hotels. They work not only with people who want to enter into that industry, but who want to progress in that industry. Some incredible stuff. They built a restaurant with a training center, all of these things. Their biggest challenge is getting funding. And why? Well, partly, and I experienced this before when I ran integrated programs in Ontario, they may get better results, they may bring in the right clients, but it doesn't fit the normal parameters of government funding. And that's a challenge. And it's a challenge that some of the emerging initiatives in Ontario face. It's not a typical literacy and basic skills program. It's not a typical skills training program. It's a blended or hybrid program. So it doesn't actually fit anyone's silo of funding. Right? We need to work with policymakers to break down the silos, not just to say that we're doing it, but to actually do it. We have to understand complex problem solving and communication in technology-rich environments. And we all excitedly wait for PIAC results, the newest version of IELTS, that will be coming out in the spring. And one of the things that it examines is complex problem solving in technology-rich environments. And in several months, we'll be putting out a paper that talks about what does that mean in the classroom? What does that mean in terms of program design? Finally, what is really important is we need to continue the discussion, right? So that, as I originally wrote on this, that we need to move from policy to practice. And then I started to think, no, we need to move from practice to policy. And then I think, oh, gosh darn it, both things actually have to work together. And part of that begins with a conversation, right? As I ended off my Menial No More presentations with saying, we know that it can be done. Why do we know? Because it's been done elsewhere. So when we look at, say, what's occurred in the U.S. in particular, how did they get to these integrated programs? Invariably, where integrated programs were the norm and traditional adult basic education became the anomaly, how did that occur? Well, it actually started because people talked. And people talked not about what exists, but what should there be. And with that in mind, they talked about the client and the learner. How can we get a learner somewhere faster, further, and better? SkillWorks in Boston came out of a literacy initiative, one of the most respected programs. iVest is now one of the most studied programs in the world, and it came out of the literacy movement. How do we get there in Ontario? I think it's a really important thing. And what I think here at Essential Skills Ontario is, I'll now have people around me grimace, is that we need to try and provide some backbone support to these conversations. And as part of that, I in turn look to the people who are on the line. How do we carry on these conversations so that we can test the hypothesis of integrated skills? So start to look at how can we do things better for the hundreds of thousands of people on some form of social assistance in this province with the tremendous individual cost and society cost. And that is the conversation that we need to have. There's hundreds of thousands of reasons to have this conversation. I don't have all the answers, obviously, but I think I sound like the X-Files in that I'm going to say I think the answers are out there. And we need as a group, as individuals, need to start to shift the conversations away from meeting various government criteria into meeting the criteria of success. The criteria of success may have an awful lot of commonalities with the former, but to reach the latter goal of moving individuals off of welfare, social assistance, ODSP, may require our programs to look different. Charles Ledbetter, the very famous social innovator in the UK, said, success comes from marrying the best elements of different things. I think we have a chance of moving to there. People are struggling with, the system is struggling with those who are on social assistance, those without a high school diploma. And if we looked back to the earlier chart about the secular trend of employment for those without a high school diploma, we're pretty certain that the numbers of non-high school graduates on social assistance is not going to be declining anytime in the near future without some purposeful thought behind how we're going to help these folks move out of poverty. And now I am done.
Are you sure, John?
Yeah.
Okay, so you know, I'm thinking we have a little bit of time here. I think we might try something a little different today for our discussion and questions. If you'd like to ask a question or have a comment for John, and you have a microphone, just raise your hand on the left-hand side, and I will unmute you. Otherwise, feel free to ask them in the question pane. You can type them out, and I'll ask John myself.
Allison, we're not following a script here.
No. Anne pointed out that wraparound is key to the Bridges Out of Poverty approach as well, which is good to know.
It's a central feature. It is not something, it's something that will appear in our final paper, but I want to make sure that it's not missed, that it is really a central conceit to all programs that demonstrate effectiveness on those who don't have a high school diploma and are on social assistance of some sort.
Mm-hmm. Well, we have a nice comment here. John, that was awesome. Inspirational from Christine.
Well, I don't know if we're looking towards inspirational, although I think one of the things is that we have to do, and I'm pretty excited that it was confirmed today, that we're having Mark Johnson or Jackson? Johnson come up from Wisconsin, and one of the really interesting initiatives in the States, I think it's gone past being an initiative, it's just a way of program delivery, is the RISE program in Wisconsin, which utilizes community college and community groups to not only deliver integrated training from the ABE side, but also they've laid out some really critically clear career pathways, right, that allow students to move in and out of the system, to earn and learn. And one of the things that he mentioned when we were on the phone with him the other day is that it really allowed individuals on welfare to earn and learn at the same time, right? That folks on social assistance can't, in many cases, afford for themselves or for their families to be in long-time interventions, right, that could last 3, 4, 5 years. And that was part of the impetus, is that they wanted to move people along more quickly so that they'd actually be able to move into a job, right? And then be able to learn as they collected wages, or if they got laid off, that they actually had something to go back to that was progressive, right? So that if they left an entry-level job and came back into the training system, that said, okay, well, you were in an entry-level job. Let's gear up your skills so that you can go to the next tier, so that you can actually earn $2 to $3 more next time around, right? And that what they've seen is step by step that people disappear, but they don't disappear forever, that they disappear into jobs and come back when the time is right. Too often, and I know from, examining in some detail some of the data from OW, is they actually, right now, we just have clients disappear, take a job for 4 or 5 weeks, and they just disappear. They leave the job, and it's as if they come back to the system, and they were never in the system before, right? So that we need to find a way of providing hope and progression for folks. And I know I'm going to get some emails saying, how can we afford to do this? Well, I'll respond is, how can we afford not to? Right? We know we have labor market shortages. We know that we're going to have folks on social assistance. We need to try and get things right. As I say, there's a lot of good things going out there, but we need to find better ways of joining them up. We need to find better ways of bringing Ontario Works to the table, MTCU, and all the variety of players in a way that makes sense. I know I try to navigate through the system, and I end up with a migraine. For someone on social assistance who doesn't have a high school diploma, it may look to be such a challenge. And this is what they also found in the RISE programs, was that when particularly younger adults saw a clear sight line to employment, and that's where we got the concept of a clear sight line, that all of a sudden, if they could see in 16 weeks, I could be working for John Deere, or I could be working in a hospital, or I could be working with this manufacturer, that they saw a job at the end of the training. It greatly increased student persistence. Right? And often in many of these programs, they get them the job first, and then they work while they're working on the GED. And then while they're working on the GED, after they're done that, then let's try and get you some college credits. And then if in some cases they get all their college credits, let's look at another certificate that will help you to move along the employment progression line. And that was a really valuable lesson when you start to examine what they've been able to accomplish with people and families who were in pretty dire circumstances. Now, once again, you'd like to say that it worked for 100% of their people, and it doesn't, right? But it works for a far higher proportion than a chaotic landscape did before.
John, I just want to follow up on what you said about Mark Johnson. Just to clarify for people, Mark Johnson is the education director at the Wisconsin Technical College System, and he's going to be our guest speaker at Essential Skills Ontario's annual general meeting. We'll be sending out more information around this. He'll be speaking in Toronto. If you're interested in attending, just get in contact with us. So I have a few more comments/questions here, John. This is from Roger. We have opportunities in our region for employment, yet we bring in offshore workers. There must be creative solutions to address the employer's needs in tourism or agriculture while delivering appropriate training for our learners. That was Roger.
All right. Well, I'll avoid the bringing in immigrant workers to a certain extent just because it's a little bit of a politically charged element. But yes, there are job opportunities. There are pieces where I think we need to adjust our vision about where our starting points. Let's say a dead-end job is only a dead-end job if we don't offer additional supports after the person became employed. And many of the things where we look at different communities and you actually look at the data, is in smaller communities, small town, rural, and remote communities, there may actually be real opportunity towards developing integrated programs. The relationships are closer, the silos don't need to be so strong. And in fact, when you look at the U.S. And Australia in particular, some of the most interesting integrated programs are in Tasmania, Australia. And so there is some real opportunity in smaller communities to bring people together. As I used to joke, I'm from Owen Sound, I used to be able to bring all of the providers around the round table in our local Chinese food restaurant. Right? But one of the things I also want to touch on that is, change is happening so fast. The skill demands are accelerating at exponential proportions. And as we start to think about preparing adults who didn't get a high school diploma or have not had an awful lot of opportunity for training, is what they're not going to be able to compete against is machines. Right? And machines increasingly are taking over what are described as routine manual tasks. Right? So much so that many labor market analysts think that by and large manual labor will disappear in the next 25 years. And if you haven't had the chance, watch some of the warehousing videos out there about all the automated warehouses coming, right? And we also can't compete with cheap overseas labor, right? It's not something that we should aspire to. It's not something that we're going to be able to do. There are, however, industries, food processing, some agriculture, still some advanced manufacturing, etc., where there is opportunities to give people, the skills around complex problem solving, working with it with technology, and employers will want, require, and need that skill.
John, we have a few more questions here. Do you think that there is progress towards an integrated approach? What practical ways can programs take to make time available to consider integrated approaches? Special funding might be key.
Yeah. Well, I think that, once again, I'll return to the United States. And, government was initially very antithetical towards integrated programs. But it was through foundations that leaders in ABE were actually able to get money. The Joyce Foundation in particular was very helpful in getting some of these things going. What they did is they found a backbone organization, for example, CLASP in the United States, sort of act as a cohesive place to get these things going. Because everyone wanted to replicate iBest, right? But a lot of policymakers didn't want to do it, right? They didn't want to upset traditional providers. So, that's something that I think here at ESO we want to explore. How do we act as the backbone? How do we get some of the Canadian foundations interested in this approach, right? For them, many of them, they're interested in social innovation, right? How do we socially innovate programs? And so yes, there clearly needs to be incentives. Yes, I think that I'd like to see it come from government, but do we have to do some work on our own? Yeah, I think so too, right? That having been part of another initiative that tried to work with what was quote-unquote a social intractable problem, is we actually had to will an answer to happen. And so it's going to take will. And as I think Alice and the rest of the ESO here, I think you'll get a sense of will from this organization's place. And one of the things is I'm starting to encourage is if people want to drop me an email or give me a call, and there's my email, there's a variety of ways in which this organization can support this conversation and take it forward in a cohesive manner. What we don't want to see is little bits and pieces occurring that we don't know about, right? If there's something good going out there, we want to tell the story, right? We not only want to tell the story, but we want to help analyze and make it better, right? And because we do think, or I think, before Allison put in the clause that all opinions represented here are John McLaughlin's, is that I think we need to try and engage in something which is about change, managing change, and find ways in which we can move this forward. And I really believe that the time is ripe. I tried to run integrated programs 20 years ago. I ran a whole bunch of them. I can still remember this. We ran a variety of programs here in Toronto. We ran a pet care program in cooperation with PetSmart. Our traditional literacy program was having problems attracting clients. We got a whole new program. We had a lineup around the block in Regent Park, right, of fairly desperate people who wanted to be part of that program. We only had, 16 spots. We could have filled the program tenfold over. At the end of the day, 14 of those clients got employed, most of them by PetSmart, some of them by other companies as well, right? But the only problem was it didn't actually fit anyone's funding criteria. But it included loads of literacy skills, loads of numeracy skills, and a bit of hands-on job experience, right? And, the program was successful for everyone, but it didn't meet program guidelines. And so after we ran it twice, it never happened again. And what we want to make sure is when someone starts running these things again, that they continue.
Yeah, and to follow up on what John said, if you look at the slide there, we have put up his email, so you're welcome to get in touch. John, one more question quickly. Is there any research or policies on how the United States encourage employer participation for the integration approach? The learn and earn is certainly a model that has been tried, but more in a linear model because employers aren't open to the approach of working part-time and school part-time. Employers in our area are not feeling the pain of the limited labor pool for entry level. Any ideas?
Yeah. Well, and what we do know is that when they feel the pain, that they're more likely to come to the table. And that's where I think, and you'll certainly see in Alberta, where they're feeling the pain. Employers are certainly a lot more open about coming to the table and looking at exploring underutilized labor pools. But we also have a number of communities in Ontario that are struggling around the labor market. But yeah, there is a lot of information about how people actually got employers to the table, right? One of the key ways was not just to go talk to them about what the skills were, not to just go talk to them about, job openings, not just to go talk to them about what they thought or asking them if they can use their logo, but it was actually asking employers to come help teach. Can we use your practices? And in the latest Department of Labor initiatives, the social innovation grants done through the White House, the vast majority of them actually resourced employers to help with providers. Right? And one of the things is that we may have to do is change the way in which we look at employers and to try and think about how do we resource them correctly. Right? But whoever sent me that email, I can try and forward an awful lot of that stuff.
Okay, perfect. And on that note, we are at the 2 o'clock mark. So I've noted some of your other questions, and we'll be following up via email when the recording. So thank you so much, everyone. Thank you, John.
Thank you, everyone.
Okay, have a great day.